Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to be able to rise and speak in this chamber, but not happy about the occasion. We are talking today about yet another example of the culture of secrecy that has penetrated this government. Actually, it really was baked in right from the start. And that's the shame of it, Mr. Speaker. Many Canadians are old enough to remember the 2015 election campaign, where this government promised to be the most open and transparent government in Canadian history. And the shame of this is how they have flagrantly broken that promise every day of this Parliament.
Every day.
This is a government that is just reflexively secretive in all things and scandal prone from the start. Just going back to their promise of openness and transparency, just to set part of the stage here. I mean, this is a government that passed an access to information law after it was first elected that the Information Commissioner said was a step backward in access to information. They promised, and in no small part, succeeded in that 2015 election. They figured out how to eat the NDP's lunch and how to go after traditional NDP supporters. Many members of the NDP, to their credit, had long spoken about openness and transparency and had criticized access to information over the decades in Canada. That was one of the promises where the Liberals zeroed in on a group of voters, promised them what they wanted to hear, and then broke the promise. And this attitude of reflexive and instinctive secrecy governs every bit of conduct of this government. We've seen it time and time and time and time again. This government is a scandal-plagued government that does not regard, that has no regard for our laws around ethics and around access to information. Early on in this government, let's not forget that the Prime Minister broke the law and accepted an illegal vacation. That was one of the first things he did, and became the first Prime Minister to be found to contravene the Conflict of Interest Act. It wasn't long after that. This is the type of scandal we see from this government over and over and over again. But a year after that, it's everything from the India trip, wherein this government took a man convicted of terrorism, convicted of the attempted murder of an Indian cabinet minister, and who had assaulted a former Premier of British Columbia and member of this Parliament. This is the company that this government keep. We saw early in the 42nd Parliament the SNC-Lavalin scandal, wherein the Prime Minister brought in a new law, snuck it into a budget implementation bill. I was at the Finance Committee. In fact, Mr. Speaker, you were there too, I recall, where they snuck in a deferred prosecution law into a budget implementation act. And we scratched our head at the Finance Committee and said, what is this doing in a budget implementation act? Even you, Speaker, and other Liberals that were around the table were wondering about this. Well, it was implemented into law, and it became pretty clear pretty quickly why that deferred prosecution law was brought in. It was brought in to get a corrupt company off the hook in furtherance of the interest, in his own words, for the member from Papineau, who said this was why it was essential that this company, this corrupt company, be granted a deferred prosecution, something hand-delivered to that company for that purpose by this government in a budget implementation act. And the fallout, what we saw from that was the fallout that resulted in cabinet resignations, caucus expulsions, the retirement of the chief clerk of the Privy Council. We saw, and it's to the credit of Jody Wilson-Raybould, who stood up to this government and said, this kind of greasy corruption will not be allowed to stand, that I will not allow the Prime Minister and his office to interfere in a criminal prosecution. This is what happened, and she was fired as Minister of Justice, shuffled, then dumped and expelled from the Liberal caucus. We have a government where the then Fisheries Minister tried to give a fishing license, a lucrative clam fishing license, to a relative. Thank you, and thanks to my friend behind me, the member from Caribou Prince George, for bringing that to light. And so this is all in the 42nd Parliament. You know, this is right back from the beginning. So we come back into the 43rd Parliament, much reduced numbers on the other side, in no small part to these this kind of dishonest conduct. And what do? They pick up right where they left off and hand $500 million over to a friendly but ultimately discredited charity, under the WE scandal, where the conflicts of interest of the then Finance Minister and Bill Morneau and his ties to that organization ultimately led to his resignation. We saw the Winnipeg's Labs scandal emerged in the 43rd Parliament, where this Parliament found this government in contempt over its refusal then to table documents that were for which the production was ordered by this House. Elected members of Parliament who have the right under the Constitution of Canada, we have the Charter, which guarantees the democratic rights of Canadians, and the Constitution of Canada, which declares that this is the supreme inquisitor for Canadians, that members of this Parliament have the right to documents and to compel witnesses in furtherance of holding the crown, holding the government to account to Canadians. And so the refusal to table documents dealing with the espionage that had occurred in a top secret laboratory, that they be tabled in this House of Commons, and the Speaker we had to order the chief of that agency to the bar to be admonished by the Speaker. But, you know, Liberals make sure they help their own. That member, after being admonished by this House, was shuffled off and given a high-paying job with another agency. So that's how accountability works with this government. We have another election. We get these guys squeak their way back in, and no sooner does that happen than we have the pandemic, Mr. Speaker, and in part of its toward the tail end of the pandemic, they trot out this ArriveCan app, an application that didn't work, that sent thousands of Canadians to quarantine unnecessarily and in error. We find out that there were a couple of middlemen that made off with millions of dollars, and when the parliamentary investigation into this revealed this, again, members that then the Liberal insiders that are getting rich out of this refused to answer questions, or had to be brought to the bar again. These were unprecedented steps that hadn't been resorted to in decades, but under the level of corruption of this government and the necessity to obtain information to get to the bottom of scandal after scandal after scandal leads us to where we are today. I don't know how much time I've got left, Mr. Speaker. We're just... all right, good. Okay, a couple of minutes? All right, well, today we now are to the point where we have the latest, and I'm going to end up having to get deeper into this when we resume, but the current SDCTC crisis, where we have $400 million that have gone out into the pockets of Liberal insiders, and questions that remain unanswered, documents that, again, have been ordered by this House. The House voted for the production of these documents. This isn't something conservatives have just dreamed up. This is the House of Commons, where the Conservatives have but 119 seats by my, I think, last count. 121. What are we up to? 121. We in this Parliament. Anyway, the point is that we don't have enough votes to do this just as an act of partisanship, Mr. Speaker. This is what the majority of the House of Commons, including members of all parties, except for the Liberals over there, who in furtherance of their culture of secrecy continue to withhold documents. So we are seized with this, and they would say, well, boy, if the Conservatives would just kick this over to committee, and then we can carry on with the business of this government. But we don't, Mr. Speaker, Canadians want a carbon tax election. That's what we want. We need to settle the issue of getting the documents now, and we can then move to other matters.
Having